Thank you very much, Heather. It really is a pleasure and an honor to be here to share a lot of ideas and thoughts with you that I've experienced over the years. The football stuff that she talked about when I was a Scholastic All-American in Indiana, I have to make a confession. I was 6'4" and 250 pounds. And this is what happens when you play in the Big Ten. Interestingly, this morning, I woke up at the Hilton Hotel in the waterfront, and I had a thought that just came to my mind. I was thinking of the lecture and what I was going to say this evening. And I thought of Randy Pausch. I don't know if any of you recall Randy Pausch. He was a computer scientist at Carnegie Mellon University. And at that university in Pittsburgh, annually they select a top academic to give a very special lecture. And this lecture, the individual is asked to think deeply what means the most to him, and then share this idea and the wisdom that they've learned over the years with the audience. And 1 month before the lecture, he was found to have terminal pancreatic cancer. He gave the lecture, and he did share the wisdom, and he chose to speak about how we find our dreams, finding our dreams. And he concluded with a statement about the meaning of life is to live life the right way, the right way. And as I woke up, I really did. I'm thinking, the lecture that I'm going to give you, the thoughts that I'm going to share you, really is kind of a last lecture for me, in a sense. I'm not going to be speaking to you again. I don't know what I'm harboring in any way in my vascular system or my lymphatic system or anything else. So I'm looking at this as a last lecture, if you would, and I'm going to share with you many, many ideas of what I've learned. And so Randy talked about living life the right way. So if I asked you all, what is the most important thing in your life? The most important thing. I've been working with patients for 35 years. I've operated on thousands of patients and taken care of many people with intractable problems. And when I think of what's the most important thing in life, I think of the Roman poet and historian Juvenal, who said, mens sana in corpore sano. A healthy mind in a healthy body. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the foundation of what it's all about. Without this, what do we have? And interestingly, when Heather invited me, I really looked up and purchased her book, Exercise Physiology, which is what really leads to a healthy mind and a healthy body. But there's one other component that I wanted to share with you. Besides a healthy mind and a healthy body, it's balance. It's homeostasis. It's what Claude Bernard, the eminent physiologist in the 1800s, called the milieu intérieur, the interior milieu of our body, and how it maintains itself in balance despite variations in temperature, cold, heat, and electrolytes, etc. Balance. And along those lines, several years ago, Heather mentioned that I was president of the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. This is a large group of neurosurgeons, and I was asked to give a presidential address. And I chose as my topic then the title From Icarus to Equanimitas. So who was Icarus? Icarus was the mythological individual in Greece, on the island of Crete, imprisoned with his father, Daedalus, the greatest architect in ancient times. And they were imprisoned with this labyrinthine prison with a minotaur, a man-eating bull. And if they went the wrong way, it's all over. So being very creative, Daedalus constructed wings made of wax and feathers so that they could fly out of the prison and escape. But being very prescient, his father cautioned Icarus, when you attain flight with the birds and you feeling omnipotent, be careful not to fly too high with your hubris, lest the sun melt the wax on your wings and you plunget into the sea, nor fly too low, lest the waves wet the feathers and pull you into the sea. In other words, seek balance. Seek balance in your life. So what I'm going to share with you this evening, several things. We're going to talk about the epidemic problem of burnout. Who here isn't at some point overwhelmed, overworked, overcommitted, overtired? You know, everyone. But it's a big problem now for many reasons. So we're going to talk about burnout. We're going to talk about success and failure. This is going to be a very personal talk with all of you. I'm going to share some very personal things. Going to talk about the consequences of stress on the human body and the human brain. And finally, I'm going to give you the secret to a balanced life. If you follow what I will share with you, I guarantee you'll have balance in your life. So, with that, let's briefly talk about burnout. What is it? How many here have felt emotionally or physically exhausted at some time? Depressed? There's cynicism that goes along with that, a low sense of personal accomplishment. I really don't feel I'm accomplishing much with my job. Why am I here? It's a big problem. And when you look at just the U.S. workers, it's 50 to 60% of people at some point will experience emotional, physical exhaustion, become sarcastic, maybe a little abusive in their workplace. It leads to about 120,000 deaths a year. In Japan, the overworked syndrome is called karoshi, death by work. It's a problem, particularly with the Japanese, but really, certainly in this country as well. How about grad students? How many grad students do we have here? Be careful, guys and girls. I mean, as you can see here, anxiety, depression, very common. And in terms of unhealthy behavior, 55% of women and men will experience this syndrome. And Heather and I were talking about lawyers. I don't know if any lawyers are here, but 1 in 5 have a dependency on alcohol or other drugs. It's a big problem. And 28% of the practicing attorney struggle with depression. So it's a huge problem. We were talking about mental health and transcranial magnetic stimulation and various therapeutic approaches to this. But it's a huge problem in all professions. In medicine, I mean, it's ubiquitous. You're talking about 40 to 50% of doctors at some point are in a burnout situation. What are the consequences of that? The consequences are medical errors are contributed to approximately 250,000 deaths a year, medical errors. There's a 50% increase in medical errors if doctors have signs of burnout. And it's doctors that commit medical errors are twice as likely to have suicidal ideation and suicidal thoughts. So, I'm kind of painting a dark picture here to some extent, and we'll get to a solution and a problem, but that's to outline the problem that I think many of us have already experienced. And this is a very intelligent, high IQ audience. So does that protect you from burnout? I love Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. There's little correlation between academic and emotional intelligence. People with high IQs can be stunningly poor pilots of their private lives. All you have to do is pick up the newspaper every day and read about our politicians in Washington. if you want about, these are very bright people, but they're stunningly poor pilots of their private lives at times. And the paradox is society rewards us when we're out of balance, when we're focused on one little thing, when we're really not in a balanced state. We're most useful to society when a small part of us is overdeveloped than when we are, in quotes, whole people. So this kind of sets the stage for what I really like to talk about, and that's the good. We're going to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak. The good is the triathlons, and I can speak about that forever. As she said, I've done 8 Ironman distance triathlons, and the football took me down to about 6 foot, and the triathlons now took me down to 5 foot. So I continue to shrink. But the story of the Ironman, which was just run this past Sunday in Hawaii, in the big island of Kona, started in 1986 when there was an award banquet in Honolulu. The swimmers who competed in the Honolulu, the Waikiki rough water swim of 2.4 miles, the marathoners who did the Honolulu Marathon, 26.2 miles, and the bikers who raced around the island of Oahu, 112 miles, were all at this awards banquet. And they were all drinking beer. The testosterone was very high. And they were arguing who's the best athlete, the runner, the biker, or the swimmer. John Collins, a naval commander at the time, said, look, why don't we settle this once and for all? Let's do all 3 on the same day, and whoever finishes will have bragging rights for the rest of their lives and say they're an Ironman or an Iron Woman. So that's how it started. And it's now, as I said, Sunday. It's a 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike up the volcano at the end of the big island at Hawaii, and then a run through the darkened lava fields around Kona, 26.2 miles. About 5 years ago, I was very fortunate to do this race with I'm blocking his name, Heinz Ward. Heinz Ward, you may recall, was a Steeler, and he was responsible for me getting this ring. I had to bring that out, President. But that wasn't what he was really famous for. He was really famous for winning Dancing with the Stars. So he won Dancing with the Stars and became internationally and nationally known for that, not for being the best wide receiver and going into the Hall of Fame. So Chocolate Milk approached him and said, Mr. Heinz, we'd love to sponsor you to do the Hawaiian Ironman Triathlon. And we're going to give you $500,000, a $20,000 bike, Paula Newby Frazier, who won it 7 times, to be your coach. And we want to see if you could. He had never done a triathlon before. He and I were on the Steelers together for his whole term there, and we knew each other very well. And I went up to him and I said, Heinz, look, I've done this a few times. I know a little bit about it. It's a tough race. And how about talking to Chocolate Milk? I'd like a little remuneration, a little sponsorship. I'm happy to step up and sponsor them. Sure, Joe, I'll look into it. And the next week I got a 6-pack of chocolate milk in the mail. So he gets $500,000. I get a 6-pack. But this, and he did beat me, I have to say. But this is the swim start of the triathlon. If you place yourself wrong, they have scuba divers underneath in case you drop out. And it can be a very rough thing. I start way back on the beach. You don't see me in this picture. But I did finish, and it's been a phenomenal experience in my life, one of the very greatest. And I've done a whole lot of races, as was said. And actually 3 weeks ago, I finished a triathlon in Columbus, Ohio. And as I mentioned earlier, I prefaced it with bragging rights. And I finished first in my age group. Don't ask how many were in my age group. But I did finish. Somebody in this room might say, I'm addicted. Heather wrote this book. I don't know if you all know that. Exercise Addiction, The Truth About Exercise Addiction. Probably is true. It's a great book. She really went into the neurochemistry of what happens in the brain with all this. I'm going to touch on that a bit too. But the question, if I were in the audience, the question I would have would be, what prompts somebody to do this? What's the motivation that in the middle of your career, age 40, you start running, biking, swimming, and doing things that are rather extraordinary that you haven't done before? What's the motivation? And so let's talk a little bit about the good. The motivation is, so in the good, when I finished my residency and I went to the University of Pittsburgh, it was a wonderful, wonderful environment and time. I was appointed the head of neurosurgery at the University Hospital. We were doing phenomenal surgical procedures for giant aneurysms in the brain. And I was appointed the first NFL surgeon, neurosurgeon actually, in neurosurgery with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So remember I told you about Icarus and hubris? Everything was going very, very well in my life. I had it all. And until there was a major train wreck. So the train wreck occurred in January many years ago. My father died suddenly at age 60 of a heart attack. My wife left with 2 children in the middle of winter, and I no longer could do surgery. I could not operate. My mental status was such that I was completely depleted and unsafe, and I recognized that. And one day I was doing awake craniotomies on patients who are awake, guiding me into the right part of the brain in terms of tumors and cysts and things like this. The next week, I was working in this truck stop that was bequeathed to my mother by my father, a very heavily indebted truck stop, the huge mortgage. And I was filling up 18-wheelers, flipping hamburgers, and wondering, how did this happen? What happened? A nice guy like this ending up in this kind of a situation. So I lived in this farmhouse. My immune system was so suppressed, I contracted hepatitis from the truck stop food. My skin was completely yellow. I didn't think I was going to live. I didn't care if I lived, quite frankly. And I was for 2-3 months in this situation. And this is so poignant. The life of every man is a diary in which he means to write one story, but writes another. His humblest hour is when he compares the volume as it is with what he vowed to make it. This was not what I had vowed to make of my life. But out of adversity, sometimes very positive things happen. When you how do you learn to handle adversity? No one would choose this kind of situation. But to survive, you have to somehow come to grips with things. And it was at this point that I really, really became very aware of the mind-body connection. The whole field of psychoneuroimmunology. Think about it. Psycho, the brain, neuroimmunology. Our brain has direct input into our immunologic system so that when you're depressed, not only do you feel badly, but you're suppressing your NK killer cells, your white blood cells, your your defensive mechanism so that you're more liable to everything from cancer, heart disease, stroke, infections, the whole works. And there's major changes in your hormonal systems. So the neurotransmitter loss, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in terms of anxiety, lack of sleep, and how it affects your immunology, your endocrinology, and your brain are all vastly intertwined. And this is all the psychoneuroimmunology. So it's stress. How many here, I was going to ask, how many here have never experienced stress? I mean, we all have it. That's the human situation, stress. And we'll talk about that again, the importance of stress to enhance your health or depress it. So when we were on the savannah in Africa 30, 40, 50,000 years ago, being chased by a lion, that was stressful, very, very stressful. Certain things happen in terms of your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis that are life-saving. Well, I'm going to share with you another story about what life is like with this kind of stress. So, and Brian, this is what we were talking about this morning, about lawyers. I love lawyers. My daughter's a lawyer. No, I take that back. But, so, this is a very poignant story. So 7 years ago, I was sued by a jockey who alleged that I guarantee that I've operated on his neck. He would go back and win the Belmont Stakes and maybe the Kentucky Derby. And he had a complication. The plate, the mini plate this big that I put in his neck, a screw pulled out and came loose, 3 millimeter screw came out. And he subsequently had to have another operation, but it's a complicated story. But it wasn't known at the time that he had bulimia. Do you know that 50% of jockeys have bulimia? Why? They want to make weight. They have to make weight. We didn't know this in advance, but regardless, that means there's no bone turgor. You put a screw in it, it's not going to stay. So the bottom line is 3 years after my suit, I helped defend a orthopedic doctor who was the team doctor for the Ravens, who operated on a defensive back for the Ravens, had the same complication. And they took 5 days to select a jury, and the following Monday, he went to get in his car to go to court for the first day of trial and dropped over dead from a massive pulmonary embolus. So I was in court this past May a year ago, actually, and I was on the stand for 3 weeks. In the court for 3 weeks. I was on the stand for 3 days, cross-examined intensely, and the day came for the jury to come back with a verdict. So I'm being sued personally, as well as through the university, and the judgment would have completely destroyed anything I had if it would have come through, if it would have been for the plaintiff. So the day the jury was to come back, I developed this discomfort here in my xiphoid area, right in the pit of my stomach. And I thought I best not go. I thought of this fellow from Charlotte that died. I said, I got in an Uber, went to the emergency room, and basically had a stress test, and then I was catheterized, radial artery catheterization of my heart. And this is an important slide in terms of mental stress and hemostasis when physiology becomes vascular harm. So what happened to the man being chased by the lion when he ran through the bush, sliced his arm open on a thorn bush? Did the bleeding stop, or did it continue to bleed profusely, physiologically? You become hypercoagulable when you're under stress to save your life. So this chronic unremittent stress led to this angiogram of my circumflex artery showing a 90% occlusion. So I'm lying on the table with a fentanyl stupor. Fentanyl really does work. But I was IV fentanyl, and the nurse comes in and said, Dr. Maroon, we want you to know the jury, your lawyer called, the jury came back, and it's a unanimous verdict for the defense. And I'm thinking in this stupor, a lot of good that does me now. So a stent was put in. This is what a stent looks like in your coronary artery. And everything I thought was terrific. Okay, I'm out of here. We won the court case. I'm able to get back to my life. And about 12 days later, I was walking up a very steep hill, working out, trying to get back to some kind of exercise regimen, and I developed severe pain in my right buttock. And I waited a minute or two and walked again, severe pain in my right buttock. Did it 2 or 3 times. And I couldn't figure, I knew it wasn't sciatica. So I went home and I listened to my femoral artery with a stethoscope, and there was a very loud bruit. A bruit is a noise you hear when an artery is partially occluded. So I ordered an MRA the next day, and this was my MRA demonstrating a huge clot in my iliac artery. And the clot in white, and then the stent. So what's the message? I figured I have to make some lemonade out of this big lemon. So we published this paper in the Journal of Neurosurgery on catastrophic complications from medical legal stress syndrome. So at least I got another paper out of it. So the point is, so now I'm in the farmhouse. What do? Middle of winter. And I picked up this little book that was given to me in high school as a leadership award in high school by William Danforth, the founder of the Purina Chow Company in St. Louis. And it's I Dare You was the title of it. And he said, this book is for the daring few who are headed somewhere. Those afraid to dare might as well pass it up. It will weary the lazy because it calls for immediate action. You can be a bigger person. I'm going to prove it to you. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to forget everything I said tonight except what I'm going to show you next. And this is what I want you to remember, because this is the secret to a balanced life. Presumptuous, he says. Presumptuous, it is. But regardless. So what I want you to do, either on your pencils, if you're taking pencil and paper, if you're taking notes, is draw a square. Or in your own mind, draw a square. Work, family, social, spiritual, and physical. Now, in your mind or on your paper, I want you to think about your life, and I want you now to draw a line equivalent to how much time you spend on each side of your square on a daily basis. And as you see, mine looked like this. When I really was in that farmhouse, it was all work. It was pedal to the metal. It was ego. It was striving for the wrong things. And there was no family. There was no spirituality. And in the physical, I was 15, 20 pounds overweight and couldn't walk up a flight of steps without being very dyspneic, very short of breath. So that's where I was in the winter of my discontent, so to speak. But as I mentioned, adversity introduces a man to himself. All of you have experienced significant adversity, and you've had to deal with it, you've had to overcome it. And what I'm going to do now is spend the next few minutes talking about each side of the square. And so let's talk about the physical and the nutritional side of the square now. So how did I get back? It was in the springtime. The banker who held the mortgage on the truck stop called me and said, Joe, I think you need to get out of the house. You need to go for a run. I think he just wanted to know if I'd be alive long enough to pay off the mortgage. But we went down to the local high school track. I made it around 4 times, and I said, absolutely never again. I'm exhausted, I hurt, and I don't want to do this anymore. But that night was a very interesting thing. That night was the first night I slept in probably 4 months. And a little light bulb went off, and I said, So the next day, I went down by myself, and I did 1.5 miles. And then the third day, 1.75 miles. And pretty soon, I was like Forrest Gump running through Wheeling, West Virginia. You know, there he goes. And the unintended side effect of what I was doing in running had an amazing effect that we'll talk about on my brain, my personality, my body, and everything else. So I got tired of running, so I learned to swim in the local YMCA. And then at that time, it was about in the early 80s, triathlons were just becoming popular. So I said, gee, maybe I should learn how to ride a bike. So I got a bike, an old beat-up Schwinn, and entered into a 10-man triathlon. 1/2 mile swim, 10K run, 10-mile bike. When I did that, I felt like Roger Bannister breaking the 4-minute mile. It was such a high to do that. But what was happening, my weight was coming off. I knew my diet was absolutely horrible. I was putting junk fuel into my body. So I changed my diet. I started to sleep. And we all know the stronger bones, heart, blood pressure, less fat, improved sleep. All that is you know about. This is not so known about. Heather has this beautifully outlined in her book, by the way, Exercise Physiology. So what happens in the brain when you exercise, when you work out? There's a molecule called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. BDNF does 3 things. Number 1, it enhances neuronogenesis. You make new brain cells. What does stress do to the memory center, the hippocampus of the brain? It kills brain cells. High cortisol, chronic cortisol, kills your brain cells, and your hippocampus literally shrinks, and that's been demonstrated. Exercise enhances the formation of new brain cells, the formation of new connections, synaptogenesis, where they connect, wherein memory is encoded, and also neuroplasticity, the ability to take a huge amount of facts and spew them out, somewhat like I'm doing now. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But it also has amazing effect on the neurotransmitters of the body. What if you go into your local psychiatrist with depression, what drug do they give you first? It's a serotonin reuptake inhibitor to increase your serotonin levels, SSRIs. What does exercise do? It increases your serotonin level without the terrible side effects of the drugs. Acetylcholine enhances your memory. What happens in Alzheimer's disease? Your acetylcholine level goes through the floor. Dopamine, the feel-good hormone, the drugs that people take, fentanyl, morphine, all enhance dopamine release. That's why you feel good. And anandamide, this is a 25-point bonus question for the students. What does anandamide do? Anybody know what anandamide is? Anandamide is from the Sanskrit word meaning bliss. And I would never suggest anyone here ever use THC. But marijuana is what enhances anandamide in the cannabinoid system, which makes you feel good or high. The runner's high is probably not due to dopamine release. It's probably due to stimulation of your cannabinoid receptors and the release of anandamide, which is only discovered within the last 20, 25 years. So, and this is a book that my favorite Naomi endorsed, that I would recommend to everybody, Lifespan, The Revolutionary Science of Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to. David Sinclair, a mutual friend of ours, is the head of the anti-aging laboratory at Harvard. And he gets into for the physiology students here, what else exercise does for you. It activates the longevity genes. It inhibits mTOR, which is a very important transcription factor. It lengthens your telomeres, which the shorter they get, the sooner you have problems. Enhances NAD and mitochondrial biogenesis. The powerhouses of your cell work much more efficiently. So you can't deny the benefits of exercise and why it's better than any drug for depression. So, and there have been head-to-head studies, patients who are chronic with major depression, exercise program, drugs, always will usually win out, the exercise, and you don't have the side effects. So I was talking to one of the students earlier about epigenetics, and my father died at age 60. I'm approaching 20 years older. I hate to say the word, but I'm 79. And I thought genetically, I'm short, I'm fat, I'm just like he was. I have limited time. It's in my genes. I'm going to die earlier. And so why haven't I? And I haven't because of the epigenetic factors. So as you know, your genes are located on the chromosomes. The chromosomes are like a blueprint that you put on the table and don't do very much unless they're acted upon. What acts upon your genes to tell them which of the 100,000 different proteins to make and hormones and transmitters? Those things that act upon the genes are called epigenetic, and it's going to be simple in just another slide. So environmental factors are responsible for 70% plus or minus of the diseases we acquire. And I'll explain environmental factors. 30% is inherited. I mean, there's certain diseases you're stuck with, you're born, it's encoded in your genome, and you're not escape. But 70%, the cancer, for instance, very high incidence of epigenetic factors resulting in cancer. So these are 4 epigenetic factors. So if I eat a Big Mac infused with hormones, antibiotics, fed corn grown with glyphosate, wash it down with a bottle of phosphoric acid called Coke, and then have trans fatty acids in my French fries, don't exercise, and live in polluted water and smoke, and don't control my emotional stress, what does that do to your genome? These are epigenetic factors that work through various transcription factors that tell your genes to make inflammatory agents called cytokines, chemokines, proteases. What is the common cause of Alzheimer's disease, coronary artery disease, cancer, arthritis, MS? It's inflammation. So whatever we can do to reduce inflammation and enhance autophagy, Naomi's book, Glow 15, the New York Times bestseller, she has a most lucid discussion of autophagy, which is the cleansing of the inside of our cells and how that happens and why it happens. So anyway, the transcription turn on your genes to make inflammatory agents. In contrast with an anti-inflammatory diet, Mediterranean diet, polyphenols, appropriate supplements, fish, lean meat, exercise, clean environment, not too much drinking, smoking, etc., and control of emotional health. So important in the sense that we can relate that to the blue zones. You may have read the book. Where do people live longest in the world? Any ideas, anybody? Couple? Okinawa, Sardinia, the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California, Nicoya, in Icaria. Icaria is where Icarus supposedly fell into the sea, and they named the island after Icarus. But so what is it in common with all of these places? That they have more centenarians than any place else in the world. So what is it that's unique? Well, it's the epigenetic factors. And their diet, grains, fish, lean meat, olive oil, a little red wine. They work hard, which is their exercise. They have relatively clean environments, and they have very strong spiritual family units. What's the importance of that? The spirituality in the families is a backstop to control stress. People don't feel left out if they have a problem. They have a family to rely on. And as you know, in this country now, that's a major, major problem. So that's nutrition, that's exercise. Let's look at the spiritual side of the square. And I'm not here to proselytize or convert anybody, but the more, I don't like to say older I get, the more mature I get, I realize more and more the importance of spirituality. And this is Father Ephraim, the spiritual head of the Greek churches in this country, monasteries. And I got to know him well. He is actually a patient of mine. And we were very close. And he actually gave me this prayer rope that I'll tell you a little bit more in just a minute. But he said, like Randy Posh, what's it all about, Alfie? It's to gain perspective on the greater purpose of our lives. You know, all of your students, I just envy you where you are now in many ways. So it's struggling. What is the purpose? What am I here for? What am I going to do? What role do I have in society, to my family, to myself? Very, very important questions. And the question of what's your passion? Why, how, what? Begin with why. Why are you doing what you're doing? Very, very important to get the perspective, because the purpose of life is a life of purpose. And you're in the area, the time now of finding out, what is my purpose? What's my purpose, my real purpose? And this is a spiritual scene. When you're standing with 1,800, 2,000 other athletes at 7 a.m. in the morning, the sun is coming up over the hill, and there's a church with a spire that you can see on the left of the sun. And you're wondering if you're going to make it the rest of the day. Are you going to be able to swim, bike, run for me, 15 hours, 16 hours? How am I going to fuel? How am I going to do it? Am I going to get hurt? Am I going to make it out of the swim, 2.4 miles swim? So a lot of things are going through your mind. And one of the things that I do, I have done and I still do, I kind of put myself into a trance by saying a biblical quote from the book of Isaiah. And the quote is, "He who trusts in the Lord shall be renewed. He shall rise up on wings like an eagle. He shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be fatigued." I probably say this 10,000 times so that the pain is suppressed, and it really works. And what does that have to do with this 22-year-old nurse from Pittsburgh with this huge herniated disc sticking into the nerve, that big black thing pushing back into the white? Well, one thing that I do frequently is I will pray with the patient before surgery. When are people under the greatest stress? It's when you're waiting on a gurney, ready to be wheeled into an operating room to have your head opened or your spine fused or fixed. The stress level is off the charts. So what I will do is frequently I wear this around my neck, and I take the patient's hand and I say, "Would you like to say a prayer?" If they say yes, fine. If not, I understand. But if they do, I say, "Today is the day the Lord hath made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. And with your help, get Mary or John back to his family, his work, and all the good things that he does." So I said the prayer with this young lady. I took her into the operating room, and I turned her over on her stomach when she was asleep. And this is what was tattooed on her back. "But those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and walk and not be faint." I mean, what's the likelihood of that? I've never seen this before or since, tattooed on somebody's body. And fortunately, she did very well. But it's just the power of that. I have more patients thank me for taking that 30 seconds before surgery to do that. And most clinicians are comfortable praying with patients, although I don't think it's done very often. Again, in this climate, in this sociological climate, you might get sued the way things are at times. But I think it's a very valuable thing to de-stress people if they're amenable. So we'll look at the work side of the square, and Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi is a psychologist. He was at the University of Chicago. Brilliant guy. He wrote a great book entitled Flow, The Ultimate Psychological Experience. And he said the best moments of our lives are when our mind or our body is stretched to its limits in the voluntary pursuit of something both difficult and worthwhile. When you're totally focused, it takes entire concentration. Everything becomes suspended. Time becomes suspended. Your bodily function becomes suspended. You're in a flow state, whether it's an artist, whether it's a pianist, whether it's a sculptor, whatever. When you're totally focused, you get into this flow state. And there is clarity. There's incredible focus. You lose self-awareness, and time goes by without being aware of it at all. And that flow state is what I'm very blessed to get into in terms of surgery, but the same with whatever your passion is. When you're focused, you've got to be focused on what you do. You really attain that. And we mentioned about stress. Hans Selye was a physiologist, Canadian physiologist. I mentioned Claude Bernard in the milieu intérieur, the homeostasis. Walter Cannon was another physiologist in Boston who really coined the term homeostasis, or balance. Why our salt, our sugar all of our chemicals stay in a relatively narrow range despite what we do. Hans Selye described the adaptation syndrome, what happens with stress. And he talked about the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Under stress, you release huge amounts of cortisol, which has protective effect acutely, but not long-term. But he said stress is needed. You need to be stressed by exams, by teachers, by running. And Milo of Croton exampled that. He was the greatest wrestler in ancient Greece, and he was given a heifer when he was a young boy. And he carried this heifer around with him every day. And as he grew, the bull grew, and eventually he became the strongest wrestler and won the Olympiad 12 times in ancient Greece. So it's gradual stress. Selye describes eustress and distress. EU meaning good. Stress is good until you get into distress. Here's what happens with performance with distress. You are very good up to a point, and then you get fatigued, ill health, panic, and anxiety. So this may be the most important slide I'm going to show you next. What is this? It's a simple tachometer. Why is this important? It's important because what I was totally unaware of was how I devolved into a terrible state. I had no awareness of what I was doing in my life at the time to lead to rather catastrophic problems. So what I do, and I was telling Brian this morning, every day when I get in my car to drive to work, I look at my tachometer. And I sit there for about 30 seconds, and I say, okay, where is the needle in terms of my mental stress or my mental health? Is it 3, 5, 6? Am I driving to work and it's already 7, 8, or 9 in the red zone? And that's, I mean, sometimes you may have been there. You get up in the morning and you feel like you're already in the red zone, despite a night of rest or unrest. So keep that in mind. And the relationship side of the square, I've become a marriage counselor. I have to quote William Osler, who founded the head of medicine. He was the head of medicine at Johns Hopkins in the early 1900s. He said, well, preaching to you or teaching you a doctrine of balance and equanimity, I myself am a castaway. So when I start talking about marriage and Mary, I've been a castaway because I've been down that road a couple times, and I've had problems. But these are the three most important things in life: physical and mental health, relationships with God, family, friends, and colleagues, and seize the day. This is a wonderful day for me to be here to share these ideas and thoughts with you as a last lecture. It is very rewarding for me, and I enjoy it. But I started to talk about relationships, and what I advise as a marriage counselor, if you're with your boyfriend or your fiance or whatever, draw your squares and see if they overlie even closely. If the spiritual side of it in you is long and his is 0, if the physical doesn't match, if your understanding about kids, family, finances are not in sync, then this is what happens. John Gottman is a psychologist at the University of Washington, and he did a wonderful experiment in which he took couples who were to be married, put them in a selective environment in which he filmed them, and then introduced various stress factors to see how the women and the men reacted to the stress factors. And with these factors, criticism, contempt, counterattack, and stonewalling, when these were present, he could predict 90% of the time divorce before they got married. He did it. And he predicted. So if in your relationships there's contempt, there's criticism, there's counterattack, there's stonewalling, again, be aware and take the appropriate precautions. With all that negativity, you got to laugh. It lessens stress, increases altruism, fosters connections. And I'm going to rather quickly wrap up with a tutorial in the connectome, epigenetics, and neuroplasticity. Now, a little heavy it may sound, but it really is very, very simple, and it's absolutely essential that you understand this. What is the connectome? Anybody? The connectome is the comprehensive map. It's the wiring diagram of your brain. It's how your brain is connected. The connectome. There's a connectome study that was funded with $100 million by the NIH to do MRIs on 1,500 different people and then study the connections in the brain. And if you think, how many stars are in the Milky Way? If you look outside tonight, look up at the sky, how many stars are in our Milky Way? There's 100 billion stars in the Milky Way. There's 100 billion neurons inside our cranium. It's the microcosm that reflects the macrocosm of the universe, with trillions of connections and thousands of fiber tracks coursing through. It's not just mush. And with very sophisticated imaging now at the University of Pittsburgh, we have incredible neuroradiologists who do imaging that just blows your mind in how you can see these fiber tracks. So we mentioned the genome and epigenetics and the connectome. Our genome is fixed, as I said. Our connectome changes throughout life. It's the epigenetic response factors that are responsible for modulating the connections in our brain. And I think you should get that from the previous slides. And what are the epigenetic factors that affect the connectome? Number one, of course, genetics. If you smoke marijuana, drink heavily, do crack when you're pregnant, that is clearly going to affect the genome of your child in utero, will have a much more predominant propensity towards addiction. Maternal health and habits are crucial. Physical activity and stress, environmental factors, sleep patterns, all affect the developing human brain. This is a whole new field of medicine called connectomics, a new paradigm for understanding brain disease. And the epigenetic mechanisms in mood disorders targeting neuroplasticity. So what we want to do is somehow use epigenetic factors to modulate these tracks and take advantage of the neuroplasticity. So what I'm saying was said by Herodotus 2,500 years ago. He said, "No man ever steps into the same river twice." Why can I not step into the same river twice? Because it's constantly flowing. It's constantly moving. Our brains are the same way. Everything that you hear, see, touch, feel, taste modulates the connectome, your ability to perceive things. Nothing permanent except change. And neuroplasticity is that mental activity that is constantly reorienting your synaptic connections and the fiber tracks within your brain. So you're never the same. You can never put your foot into the same river twice. Your brain is never the same after this convocation. And again, nothing's new under the sun. Proverbs, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he shall be. Think about that. As a man thinketh, so he shall be. What does that mean? Physiologically, kinesiology students. What does that mean? It means your thoughts constantly modulate your brain as well. What you think is what you shall be. Structurally, not just psychologically, but structurally. So I'm going to close up with another brief story. President Costa and I were talking earlier about how as you get older and you develop a lot of nodes, so to speak, which is how the connectomes are described in terms of the connections, things happen in your life that you can never plan on, never expect, and there can be serendipitous things. Serendipity means, you remember the story of serendipity? There were 3 princes from Serendip, which is the island off the coast of India. And wherever these 3 princes would go, unexpected, happy things would happen to the people. And Walpole, a writer in the 1800s, coined that term to describe that. So connect the dots, the small determining factors of human existence, why things happen. Why I'm here, because I know Naomi. Naomi knows Heather. And here I stand. I mean, connecting the dots. So what does that have to do with Kona to Kilimanjaro? Well, about 7 years ago, I was doing the Hawaiian Ironman, and I got to mile 130 out of 141 miles. And I was dehydrated, delirious, hyponatremic, and I quit. I was waiting for an ambulance or a car to pick me up, and I'm out in the Kona fields, out in the lava fields of Kona. It's pitch black, and you can't see anything hardly. They have a rope around a thing around your neck, a light rod. And I heard behind me, click, 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 getting closer, the Doppler effect, click, click. And a hand touched my shoulder in the darkest night and said, "Hey, 227, you're too close to quit. Come on, follow me. You only have 10 miles to go." And I thought, this guy has no idea where I am. I'm quitting. I can't do it. Just then, a car came down the opposite direction and shined its light on this individual. And it was Rajesh Durbal, the first triple amputee to ever finish the Hawaiian Ironman race. And a side story, I called Rajesh yesterday. He just finished the Hawaiian Ironman race on Sunday. I said, "Rajesh, how are you?" He said, "Joe, I just spent 2 days in the intensive care unit." It's a true story. He finished in, you got to finish, he finished in 17 hours and 20 minutes. He had to finish in 17 hours and 30 minutes, under that. So he did finish, but he lost 13 pounds. He got 5 liters of IVs, was in the IC. I mean, this is, Heather, that's addiction. But he's fine, and he did it. But he subsequently called me 2.5 years ago now or so and said, "Joe, I'm taking a group of differently enabled athletes to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. And you've been elected to be the team doctor." I said, I said, "Who elected me?" He said, "I did." So I called my daughter, Isabella, who was in art school in Chicago at the time. I said, "Bella, what do you think?" She said, "Okay, let's do it, Dad." She was 18 at the time. So we went to Kilimanjaro. This is the group and the porters before the climb. And it's a 5-day climb. And it's pretty rigorous, because of the hypoxia. It's 13,000 feet. And it's about, ordinarily in the room air is 21% oxygen. It's about 11% at the top of the mountain. So you can get into problems. And but this is the group climbing. And they were differently enabled. Every one of them had an amputee of some kind. There was Rajesh. One fellow had one arm, one leg, another fella, no arms. And the young man at the top hitting the golf ball off the top of Mount Kilimanjaro, no arms. He had phocomelia. And I couldn't figure out why he was carrying a driver in his backpack all the way up to the top of the mountain. And he said, it's been my dream to hit a golf ball off the top of Mount Kilimanjaro. So it gets us back to Randy Pausch in terms of what we dream, I guess. And so climb the mountain, not to plant your flag, but to embrace the challenge, enjoy the air, and behold the view. So you can see the world, not so the world can see you. So in summary, we've talked about the problem of burnout, overwhelmed, overworked, overcommitted. We've talked about hubris. We've talked about guarding against flying too high with your successes, nor plummeting too low with your failures. And we talked about the importance of diet and the epigenetics of the genome, the connectome, neuroplasticity. We covered a lot of material. And I expect you all to remember every bit of it. So thank you very much.